Tonight's presentation originated with an idea from Val Slater, and a variety of people worked really hard to make this happen tonight. John Mitchell and Sue Hatch and Amanda O'Bannon sat down and worked really hard to try and identify people who would be good panelists, who represented a cross-section of the island. They also helped develop the questions that we're going to use to get the conversation started tonight, and really made all of this possible. Mike Hutcherson took care of the PA that we're all using tonight, hopefully flawlessly. Abby Wilder provided the beautiful flowers that are around the room tonight. The IHS board set up chairs, brought in refreshments that all of you can enjoy at the end of the evening. And you should know that the refreshments are at the back of the room, water is on the right, and Arnold Palmer's are on the left. So what we tried to do tonight is we tried to choose people whose memories we haven't heard before, who haven't published memoirs, who haven't given talks at the library or the Historical Society, but people we haven't heard from, but we know were instrumental and important in the history of the island. We looked for people with different relationships to the island, varying from summer residents only to year-round residents to combinations in between. And just because someone is not on stage tonight doesn't mean they're not an island elder and they don't have stories to tell. So we look forward to more such evenings with other folks on the stage. So if you're not up here and you're wondering why you didn't get asked, the wheel will be slowly turning in your direction. We developed a set of questions so that the evening didn't come off as some sort of an interrogation. And we shared those questions with our guests, and we chose questions that we thought would kickstart memories and stories, fully recognizing that as the stories start to flow, we may not get to every question. We know the audience may have questions or comments. We have index cards at the front here on the table, and we would appreciate it if you would write down your questions on the index cards, and we will try and get to some of those at the end of the evening. We may not get to all your questions, but they will help inform and guide future evenings with elders. There will also be a second of these on August 17th, and the four people who will be joining me on stage that night will be Apple Bartlett, Buddy Bethune, Sally Pendleton, and Doug Weldon. So I'm going to do a little bit of intro for each of our guests here, and then we'll start in on the questions. And I've got this set up in alphabetical order. So Lucy Aldrich Burr began summering on Islesboro as a young child. In 1934, her parents, Winthrop W. Aldrich and Harriet Alexander, purchased the Frederick Shattuck Cottage, which had been built in 1900, on what is now Aldrich Road, and extensively remodeled the house. Lucy spent her summers on the island with her family, all of whom continue to have deep roots here. She's been a generous patron of island organizations for many years. George Durkee has lived on Islesboro his entire life. His father, also named George Durkee, emigrated from Nova Scotia in 1915 with his wife Jenny Jenkins and their eldest son Wentworth. The elder George is listed in the 1920 census as the caretaker of a summer resort on 700-acre island. By 1930, the family, which then included 8 children, were working for Louise Grace, who had built a summer cottage at the end of Keller Point Road in 1918. 3 generations of Durkees worked on Keller Point. George has also served as the island's fire chief and started Durkee's General Store. Ruth Mitchell Hartley was born on Islesboro to Burr Cushman Mitchell and Margaret Florence Pendleton. Her father, Burr, moved to the island from Penobscot, Maine in the 1920s and soon began working as a caretaker for the Aldrich family. So Ruth and Lucy have a connection. Ruth and her husband, Grayson Hartley, lived for many years in her maternal grandfather's house on Derby Road, which is where she still lives. Bill Warren was a longtime summer resident before he moved to the island full-time. His parents, Dr. Henry Stanley Warren and Madeline Keating, summered at Ryder's Cove for many years. Bill's grandmother, Mary Robinson Warren, acquired the Rose Porter Cottage in Ryder's Cove in 1927 from her father. Before there was a health center, there was Dr. Warren. Bill's father, Henry, tended island residents while on island. Bill purchased what is now known as the Dark Harbor Shop from Eben Randlett Jr. in 1973 and continues to satisfy the desire of islanders and visitors for ice cream, cheese dreams, Dark Harbor coolers, and horses' neckties. So, I have a couple of questions. Who's here for Clan Burr?
What?
Who's here for Clan Durkee? Who's here for Clan Hartley? And who's here for Clan Warren? So what we're going to do at the end of the evening is we're going to try and get photos with each of our guests and their family and supporters. So the Mitchells and the Pendletons can get together with Ruth, and we'll try and take a couple of group photos and everything. But with no further ado, we're going to get to questions. So the first question that we came up with was, what did your parents expect you to do during the day? Generally, did you stay near your home or did you travel around on the island? And whoever would love to start can start. So what did your parents expect you to do each day? Did you stay near your home or did you go off and do stuff? Ruth, you've got your iPads fired up.
Yeah, I wrote a little introduction because I didn't realize that Patrick was going to introduce, so I won't go through it all and tell you, but I will say that memory is a funny thing, that sometimes you think you know something and all of a sudden it's not true. Or else, you look way back and you think of a time and it's like a golden coin in your pocket. It's right there. It's so clear and you can remember it. And that's the way I am with some of my childhood memories. My childhood memories are very strong. I wish my memory of yesterday was as good as that back there, but it isn't. But anyway, what did my mother expect us to do? She would say, with 4 little kids under her feet, go on out and play. And so play we did. And we were lucky. We were living on the estate of the Aldriches. We were on the east side on Ames Cove. And I tell you, there's no greater experience a child can have than to grow up by a saltwater cove. And I'm sure many of you have experienced the same thing, that tide comes in, tide goes out. Tide comes in, tide goes out. You can stand in the incoming tide, you can squish your feet in the mud, you can dig clams, you can draw pictures. We used to name all the old rocks that were there. In fact, the big rock is still standing, I think, down there in the cove. And we also would go around about the cove and pick up driftwood. And my father always had a good collection of nails. And so we would take the driftwood and nail it to trees and make little houses for ourselves to play in. And I must say that I have to give credit to a lot of my experience to my dear mother, who was a great reader and a wonderful mother. She always said, well, I think of the poem that says that I never so rich for you to be, because I had a mother who read to me. Do you remember that poem? And it was true. She read to us over and over. It was very important. She had all the stories. We had wild imaginations, and I give her credit for whatever I have today. She was just a wonderful mother. And I won't talk any more than that.
So you didn't. So you were just sort of turned loose to play. George, what was your experience?
Well, I expect that they expected me to behave myself, but I'm not sure that I obeyed that most all the time. But I never did get in any trouble, thank God. And we had a good growing up, no pressure. We didn't know what was going on in Dark Harbor, and we could care less. We lived up island, and we had everything we needed up there, and so we just played and lived up there, and with our friends, and had a good time growing up. We had good parents.
And Lucy, what did your parents expect you guys to do during the day?
What was the question?
What did your parents expect you to do during the day?
Oh, whoa.
Use the microphone.
Well, I think they expected us to run our own lives and let them know at the end of the day what we did. So we had to be fairly careful because it would come back on us if we did something bad. Liberty and I decided the most fun at one point was to jump out of the second floor of the garage. Mother never found out about it because Burr Mitchell never told her. And I've always been grateful for Burr for keeping that secret. But we had a wonderful life. We were very lucky to be at Aldrich House. We had a wonderful childhood there, and I'm very grateful for it.
So if you jumped out the window of the second floor of the garage, what did you land on?
We landed on gravel, which was not a success. But we loved doing it. It was so dangerous.
And Bill?
I don't know that my parents ever expected me to jump out the second floor window. But when we came to the island, I don't think it was an expectation exactly, but when we came to the island, it was like a freedom. We were free to play and did. On the beaches and in the woods, we built forts, we swam, we made boats and swam and played with them in tidal pools and that kind of thing. But if there was an expectation, it was long. My father owned a boat for a number of years and sailed a lot. And after he sold the boat, he began to take more interest in the cottage, which had, over the years, been ignored. And so during those years, I think we were all expected to pitch in, and every year there was a project. And one year it was shingling the roof, another year was to rebuild the porch, another year was to paint the cottage. So we were all expected to pitch in that thing, but even that wasn't regarded as work. It was because the whole family was involved, it was actually fun. And then after we'd done that, we were free to play. It was in the days when the Drift Inn was open, and we were free to go up there and hang out or go to the Thursday night square dances and the Saturday night round dances. They were fantastic.
So nobody seems to have been overscheduled, which is terrific. Overscheduled.
No, definitely.
So the next question we have, and this was something that John Mitchell and Sue Hatch and Amanda and I were all sort of wondering about. We've all heard and read the stories about the telephone exchanges on the island. And we wanted to know what people's recollections were of using telephones back in the day. So does anyone have good recollections? I know, Lucy, you had one. Go ahead.
The switchboard operator, as most of you will remember, was Mrs. Hale. Mrs. Hale, Mildred Hale, was the person who knew everything about everybody on this island, and she had a particular dislike for summer kids, and she made that very clear to us. One time I tried to get hold of Laura Leonard, so I called up the switchboard and I said, Mrs. Hale, can you connect me to Laura Leonard? She said, no, I can't. She's not home. She's up to Mrs. Mills getting her sneakers. So Mrs. Hale knew everything. And it was a wonderful time to be here.
That's great. Ruth, you had one?
I was going to say that in the caretaker's house where we lived, our telephone was hooked up to the switchboard in the big house. So whenever a call came through for us, it always came through the switchboard at the big house first. And so my father was just adamant about the fact that we were not to make long-distance calls because Mr. Aldrich would have to pay for it. And so we never were able to make the long-distance calls. But my memory mostly is of Mrs. Phil. How many remember Mrs. Philbrick? You know, yeah, Mrs. Phil, yeah, and Charlie Phil and their dog Dial. Mrs. Phil, again, knew everybody in town. She was like our internet. She knew everything. If somebody's horse got away and was running down the street, she'd call them up and tell them, hey, your horse has gotten away. Or I remember my cousins would always want to call their grandmother, and they would just open the phone and say, Gumps, please. And she would know exactly who Gump was and what to call. So those were my memories of telephone.
Did everybody catch that the telephone operator's dog was named Dial? That's great. George?
Well, what I remember about the telephone is that we had one in the house that was about 5 feet off the floor on the wall. You had to stand up and talk into it, and so you didn't talk too long because you get tired. But I think the main reason for the telephone, my mother used to call Pendleton's store twice a week and order her groceries, and then they'd deliver them by horse and wagon. And call your neighbors, that's about it. You didn't chit-chat on there.
So you called Pendleton's store in Guinea? The store in Guinea was where you ordered the groceries?
They delivered twice a week. Yep.
Bills, telephones?
My answer is very simple. We didn't have a phone. More than that, my father would not have a phone. He was a doctor and made house calls in Connecticut, and the phone in our house rang day and night. And one of the things he loved about coming to our house was that there was no phone. But down the road, Rafford Herbert had the only phone that I know of in Riders Cove. And your mention about long-distance calling, Ruth, is interesting because I can remember my parents when they, once in a great while, maybe once a summer, had some reason why they had to make a call. And they would plan it. They wouldn't write it down, but practically. And they'd talk about what they're going to say because it was expensive. So, phones did become available in Riders Cove in my childhood, and there were some. They were all party phones. You could listen in to everybody, and people did.
This is before television, so it was entertainment. You know? So one of the things that's interesting, and one of the things that I found interesting when I first started visiting Islesboro was the realization that once you get here, you don't leave. So the first year I came here was about 2005, and after about 3 days, I said, "This is great. Anyone want to go to Acadia? Let's go over to Acadia." And the entire family looked at me like I had lost my mind. You just didn't go off the island. You were here and you stayed. So one of the questions we wanted to know was why and how would you folks go off the island when you were younger? And before the ferry, what did that entail? So who wants to take a stab at that one? About going off island, yeah.
Like the phone, we didn't.
That's right. We didn't go off. The only time we went off was when we hated to go because we had to go to the dentist. And that was in Rockland, and he was a dreadful man. I don't know. I hate to say that, but he really was. I was convinced. And I've had a bad feeling about dentists ever since. And the other way we used to go off on the hippocampus. Who went off on the hippocampus? Yeah. We would drive up somehow to Pripyat and get on the hippocampus at the landing up there. And my mother, I remember when I was about 13, I always had pigtails, and my sister had to braid my hair, which was a dreadful thing. But anyway, she said, yes, I could get a perm. So we went up to the hippocampus, and we went over to Belfast, walked up the hill to Miss Lenfest's beauty parlor. And she had, if you remember, if you ever went to her, she had one of those contraptions where the big wires came down from the top, and she wound every single bit of your hair, and sometimes it would burn, really. Remember that? And so, but anyway, when you got through, she'd take all the curlers out, and you'd look like a bushman, to be but I was particularly happy and felt very grown up and very beautiful.
So going off island, George or Lucy? Going off island?
Yeah. Oh, no. Oh, you go ahead. Well, okay. Yeah, the hippocampus, that was the way we got off the island. We'd go up to Pripyat Wharf, get on the mailboat. Used to come over from Castine every morning because they had a mail contract. And go to Belfast, and so if you needed to go to the mainland, like Ruth said, to the dentist, you went to Belfast, But if you wanted to do some shopping, you just went to Belfast, walked up the hill, done all your shopping, and then maybe you had money enough, you went in a restaurant, had dinner, get back to the hippocampus at 1 o'clock and make it home.
Who was the one who was
Okay.
on the hippocampus? Who was
Arthur Ladd.
Tell them.
Well, one of
The,
my
the captain was Arthur Ladd on the hippocampus.
Remember that?
Yeah. Okay, sorry.
I'm looking at what I'm supposed to be talking. Oh, a family had a boat, a wonderful boat called the Little Wayfarer. And the Little Wayfarer was so much a part of our lives. We did everything in the Little Wayfarer, including going on major picnics. Mother's idea of a picnic was 3-course, maybe 4. And we all had to plan the night before what we wanted on the picnic. So each of us would have our own picnic. And then Mother would pretend to make a chowder, which had actually been made by Burr Mitchell and brought on board to put into a pot in front of Mother so she could stir it. And it was wonderful. It was one of the best memories I have of the island.
Okay, this is great. What was the thing that you loved most to do on the island when you were young that still affects you now?
Jumping off the roof of the garage. I live almost next to the garage. Every time I go home, I wish I could do it again.
If we're talking about the question that
Things
What
that
was
you
the
loved
big
to
thing
do
that
when you were
still
young
do?
that
Still
still
do?
affect you.
I don't still do it, but it didn't up to a little while ago. When the Drift Inn was open, it was run by Tiny and Lucy Creelman. And it was a wonderful place because they had a restaurant and it had real Maine food like fried clams and lobster rolls and things. But every Thursday night was a square dance with, remember Laura Hatch was the caller? And Saturday nights were round dances, and the dances were attended by people really and truly of all ages, from little kids to, Judy, what was the name of the man who we used to call the Great White Father? Remember? He was this marvelous dancer. And that's where I learned to dance, and it's one of my fondest memories was going to the Blue Heron. To the Drift Inn.
Ruth, how about you?
So what's the question? He said
Things you loved to do most on the island when you were young that
I
still
don't
affect
know.
you.
There were just so many things. Walk around the shore. We would get up in the morning, and my mother would say, "Go play," and we would go out. And I had a very special cousin, Tom, and he was just my age, and he was full of deviltry, and I just loved it. We would go out in the morning and walk down around the point and up the other side, skipping across the rocks, high tide, all the way up to the coal wharf, and then we'd have to walk all the way back down. But also, my cousin Tom and I decided that we found an old bottle, and we washed it out, and we said we had read somewhere that somebody had, put a message in a bottle, and they had found a true love. So we thought we would do that. So we wrote a message and put it in a bottle and put our names in it and everything. I don't know what else he wrote. But anyway, we were about 12. So we took the bottle and sealed it up, went over to the Aldrich's dock and hoisted it way out as far as we could throw it. Well, about 8 years later, he had a letter from a woman in Nova Scotia, and she had picked up the bottle and found his name, and I think she thought he was some kind of a, grown-up man who perhaps might have been her lover or something. We still have the letter, and we were always doing fun things like that.
George?
Okay. Well, it's kind of a two-part question because when I was young, I enjoyed about everything I'd done, and now I enjoy sitting in the rocking chair, which I didn't do. I didn't do that when I was young.
Whether it's jumping from great heights onto gravel driveways or sending off messages to lost loves or whatever. So I would love to know something about your childhood friends and what you guys all got up to together.
Sure.
I guess looking back, my best friend in the summer nights was Teddy Bidwell, and Teddy and I palled around a lot and did a lot of things. He had a grandfather, Dr. Haggard, who was known as Bai, who was one of the kindest men I've ever known. And he let us use his workshop, his tools and paint. And for little kids, that was a pretty cool thing. So we made lots of little boats that we floated around in tide pools. We also took rowboats out in the water a lot. We just palled around a lot. Another childhood friend later on, like in my teen years, I guess, was Judy Hammond, who taught me how to dance. And I've been forever grateful for that. That's all I got.
Go ahead, Lucy. You want to go?
I wanted to mention about my parents spent a great deal of time when I was young looking for a place to settle. And every summer we would find somewhere to go to. And finally they found Islesboro. And that was a great blessing. I think I was 10 years old when they bought the big house, what we call the big house. And it was a blessing for us. It was a wonderful place to grow up. And of course we had Burr Mitchell to keep us in line, which he did very gently and beautifully. And he never told on us. Not once. He was wonderful. So we got away with quite a bit. But that's what childhood is all about.
I guess my closest friend growing up was Maynard Fairfield, and he is passed away now, but he was the closest in age, and we seemed to get along good, and we just had fun in everything we done. You know, we just created our own enjoyment and things, and we done them and had a good time.
So Bill mentioned being on the water. Did the others of you get out on the water some?
Yeah, we used to go flounder fishing, which you can't do now.
I didn't have a lot of close girlfriends. I guess it was because we lived kind of remotely from the village, and our family were our best friends always. I did have one girlfriend in high school, and she and I used to sneak cigarettes from her mother. And her mother always had a big pack of Lucky Strikes. And we would take them up into her bedroom and shut the door, open the window wide, and puff on those Lucky Strikes and blow the smoke out the window. Laura never knew. Yes, she probably did, now that I think of it. But that was it. But the other thing I wanted to tell about was I wanted to talk about, I know this may not be the question, but I worked for a while in the Dock Harbor Post Office for Ivy Babbage. Now, who remembers Ivy Babbage? Anybody? Oh, not very many. Well, she was a maiden lady. She lived on Babbage Road up near the Colony. She used to walk down to the post office every day in her high-heeled shoes. She even had high-heeled rubber boots that she used to wear. But she was an imposing presence, let me tell you. She was worse than an army general. She was just... And she would stand behind the post office, behind the window, and when she didn't want to talk to somebody, she'd slam that door shut. And so we would wait for Willis York to come with the mail. And Willis would haul in 3 or 4 big mail bags, and we would take it all apart, and we would see it. But I remember, too, there was a window in the door, the post office, box office window. And if you had a package, then that's why you'd get it. You'd go to the parcel post window. Well, in the Christmas time, of course, we always looked for that big brown package to come from Sears and Roebuck for Christmas. And we would wait and see. And of course, Mother always thought it was a big secret, but we knew all the time. But the other thing was the other box that we had that came in the mail at Christmas time every year came through the post office door, and it was a big box, and the return address said Bloomingdale's. And we would say, where in heck is that? Who is that anyway? And it was a big box of Christmas presents from Mrs. Aldrich, always a new snowsuit for each of us, always candy, and always a plum pudding.
So I think it becomes clear that family was very, very important here on the island to all of these folks. And how did you and your family get together and participate with each other? Did you play games? Did you tell stories? Did you play music? Did you go on picnics together? I mean, what were your activities with your family like? Or did you just reshingle the porch?
I'm trying to see where it is so I can read it.
Number 6.
Oh, it's a different page. Okay.
I'm going to defer to my elders.
Go ahead.
No, I don't have an answer.
Well,
Bill's been waiting all night to use that line.
I'm still thinking about when the president came to Dock Harbor to visit Josie Blair. Josie and Wattie Blair had a house here, and President Kennedy came to visit them. And my mother was an ardent Republican, and she announced very firmly that under no circumstances would she shake the president's hand. Well, she never got the chance. She wasn't invited to meet the president. Burr Mitchell was invited. So my mother, we have a porch that we used to have a porch that has stairs up to it. It's kind of a first floor porch. And Mother took the telescope and dragged it down the steps by herself and across the grass to the pier and pushed it all the way down the end of the pier to the dock, got it down the ramp to the dock, where she stood swaying back and forth, looking at the president visiting someone else. And I'll never forget that as long as I live.
So, Ruth, I know you come from a very musical family. Did you all get together?
Yeah, our thing to do at home always was music, from the time I was just little. And Mother studied music for a long time. Her mother put her out, and she studied with Bill Hatch and with Reggie Boardman and some of the local piano players. And Mother, that was her life, really. She loved it. And so, of course, when she got out of school, came back to the island, she taught school around the various, and at that time she had a horse and buggy, and she would drive around, and I think there was something like 7 separate schools on the island at the time before they consolidated them all, so she would go around. But the fun part was on a Saturday night, we would have kind of a music party, and we would invite all of the help over at the big house. And they were a lot. They were Irish people, they were English people, they were Swedish people, they were people of many, many ethnic backgrounds. And so, of course, they would all want to sing songs from their old country. And the Irish girls, Margaret would always want to sing Danny Boy, and they would all cry. And then others wanted to sing, Charlie Schaff was as English as anybody could be. And it was always about England, you know, his thing. And there were Swedish girls, but there was one fellow, and I can't remember his name, John. What was it? The Scotchman? Yeah, I guess so. But anyway, I can't hear very well. But anyway, he was just a little man with a curly hair, and he was I guess he was, I don't know just what his job was. He was a houseman, I guess. But he was Scotch. And when the party got going, he would want to do the sword dance. So we'd go in the kitchen and get a couple of brooms and lay them down on the floor, and he would do the sword dance, which meant, you know, dancing among the 4 corners of the brooms that were down there on the floor. But we would do that a lot, and we became really friendly and close with some of those people. They were, I remember Margaret, the cook, who used to take us to church. We were Catholic in the town, that we were the only ones, but that's another long story. But anyway, Margaret would take us to Mass on Sunday morning at 6:30, and we had to be there. Dad was not Catholic, he wouldn't go, but Mother would round us all up and we would go to church, and Margaret would drive our old 37 Plymouth. We would get in, and she was a terrible driver. She was just terrible. And we would jump along, cruise along, you know, bump, bump, bumpity bump. She'd always go down and park on the wrong side of the road in front of the church. But she was a dear woman, and sometimes she'd sneak over through the woods with a lovely dessert that she had made or something like that. And we were really very close to those people.
George, how about your family?
Well, we played some games at home, not too many, because the Karen board, if anybody knows about the Karen board, that was famous with us, but we kind of circulated around the neighborhood playing cards and things like that. I think my mother probably was too busy cooking for all the boys she had. Kept her busy most of the time, but we had a good time.
So we heard about President Kennedy. Were there any other historical events that really affected your family? And if so, how did they affect your family? I know World War II was a major event here on the island in terms of both summer people and the summer cottages being closed up for some of the war. But were there other historical events that were significant to you?
I haven't. It's not quite that. But I remember.
That's all right.
I remember my mother loved to be respected. And actually, she was very respected. But she was very careful about who she respected. And two people come to mind. One of them was Winston Churchill. She respected Winston Churchill. And when we were in England, when they were over in England, she tried to introduce us to Winston Churchill, and she forgot our names. There was a lot of this one. But anyway, he was not interested anyway. He did not, no. Well, that was really all I wanted to say. Two people mother respected, Winston Churchill and Burr Mitchell. Those were the two people she respected.
Anybody else on historical events?
The only thing I remember was the war, of course, and how it affected us. I was working in the post office, and we would put up these great big posters of men in uniform, and they would say, "Uncle Sam wants you." They would say, "Join the Navy, see the world." Or there were all this, glorious stuff about the war, but it was always scary because we always thought, or I always thought maybe, that there were German submarines in Penobscot Bay. And going on my bike home from work, I tell you, I didn't slow down when I went by the bay.
Now it's sharks, right? Okay, we have one last question, and then I remind everybody that we have index cards up here if you have questions you'd like to ask. We're going to pose one last question to the group, and then if people have comments or questions or whatever, we'll try and get to a few of those. I don't want to keep people up here for too long. There's refreshments in the background at the back of the room, and then, as I said before, we're going to try and set things up so that people can get shots with their friends and family afterwards here. So the last question I have for everybody is, what would you like to tell younger people about life on Islesboro when you were young?
Oh, God, my first thought is keep it the way it is. As much as you can. Respect it.
I didn't hear what you said, That was what I've got written down. Keep it the way it is.
You know what I put down here? What would you like to tell young people about Islesboro? I put down, keep it as it is.
George, do you want to make it unanimous?
Well, yeah, that's a good idea. The difference that I see in the years that I've lived here is that before all of the modern communications and cell phones and TV and all of that, we seemed like we was more of a community, and we knew different, we knew the people different and treated them different. Now it's everybody seems to be on their own, and I just think that it's good to get back to some of that neighbor stuff.
So anyone from the audience have anything of burning importance here? John, do you have anything? Here, I can get the mic to you. This is usually where I fall down.
John Mitchell, is that?
Johnny Mitchell.
John Mitchell,
Hello, John.
Ruth's brother.
Younger brother.
Younger
The
brother.
younger brother.
Goodness, what a crowd. I feel very uncomfortable being up here.
Put it up to your
I'm
mouth.
not really old enough to participate. I'm only 88. But time goes by very quickly, and I thought it would be a good time to give thanks to the Aldrich family. I know they've been mentioned several times before, but I wanted to give thanks to them in particular, from my sister Ruth and me, for the use of their wonderful clay tennis court, which now has gone away. Ruth and I played on the court in the fall and in the spring, and we let the Aldriches play on the court during the summertime. But we had a great time doing that, and actually we achieved some degree of competency in that. In college, I was on the university tennis team, and Ruth was college women's champion. So we owe much of that to the use of those wonderful clay court at Aldrich's. But there's a backstory to this too. And the backstory is that the Aldrich girls, in particular Lucy and Liberty, played a lot of tennis during the summer, and Ruth and I always wanted to watch them play. So there was a huge array of rose bushes around one side of the court, Lucy, do you remember? And Ruth and I used to hide in the rose bushes and watch the girls play back and forth.
Snag the ball.
And that was a lot of fun. Well, on one occasion, and either Lucy, or I think it was Lucy, hit the ball out in the rose bushes. And I sneaked over and retrieved the ball and ran into the woods, unknown to them. So during these 80 years, since that time, I have felt pangs of guilt. Never having told anybody about it, they never having found out about it. And I wish that there was some way to make amends after these long time. So the only thing I can think of is to ask Lucy if she will give us some forgiveness for the deed that I did. I think it was in 1942, long time ago. So Lucy, here's a small token of our appreciation.
You know what? What is this? You know, I'm 98. I don't remember what happened yesterday. What is this beautiful thing? Is it alive?
So the statute of limitations may have expired. Oh, he's returned.
That's wonderful. I'm going to cherish it. It can have a special place.
Yes. Oh, here we have a question. Thank you. Something to say about George Durkee and how it benefited this island. Come on up, and we'll give you a microphone here.
Thank you, Ruth. Just, thank you.
All right.
You're welcome.
I'm a retired fire chief from Rockland. I hold the title of the oldest retired fire chief in Rockland. But I thought at one time that I was the oldest retired fire chief in the Knox County mutual aid system. Now this is what I want to talk about. George is probably a little backward, maybe bashful in talking about his career as fire chief of this island. But one of the most important things that he did during his career that would benefit this island was to get involved with the Knox County Mutual Aid Fire Association. Being in Waldo County, it probably was impossible. But together with the fire chief in Rockland, at that time, Wesley Knight, who was the head of the Knox County Mutual Aid, he contacted, or George contacted him, they got together and pulled some strings and got him to join. This brought outside fire help from Camden, Rockland, Thomaston, Owl's Head, all of the towns in Knox County, if needed, to Islesboro. Probably was never needed, but one time I was still a green firefighter. I had taken a course with the state. I became a fire instructor for state fire training programs. George bought a 15-minute Scott air pack. Didn't have a clue how to use it, what it was for, he knew, but anyway, he called on the system. I was lucky I came over and taught his firemen how to use it. That was one of my highlights. His wife afterwards gave me a beautiful supper. They got me back to the mainland safe. But George was as much dedicated to his job as fire chief. And then I found out later, or at least I'd heard later, that he'd passed on. So anyway, I got involved in being able to get a vacation. My son, David Dyer, I'm sure a lot of you people know, his mother was born and brought up on this island. She was from the Dodge family. So the Dyer family has contact with this, but my point is to bring out the credit that I haven't heard anybody say anything about George in his career. He retired as fire chief, which put me in second place. He's the oldest retired fire chief in the Knox County Mutual Aid Association.
Very nice.
Congratulations, George.
Thank you.
So we got a couple of questions from the audience, and the first is, please tell us about your first jobs, either summer or year-round, and how your Islesboro experience changed as you grew older and worked or left the island for school or military service or whatever. So first jobs on the island, either summer jobs or full-time jobs?
My first job was when I was on Islesboro, was when I was 15. My oldest sister, Ann, had just graduated from college, and so my parents let her come up to the island, provided she take me with her. And my other sister, Judy, came. They both got jobs at the yacht club, and I got a job working for the Lansings as a sort of a caretaker, mowing the lawn and doing the gardening and cleaning the swimming pool. And I loved it. I lived in Riders Cove, and I would walk all the way to Lansing's every morning. But to be fair, you almost always got a ride. If you walked on Islesboro and somebody saw you walking, they picked you up. You didn't stick your thumb out or anything. So that was my first job on Islesboro.
You've been important ever since.
George?
I believe my first job would be caddying down to the golf course, and that's before they got all the carts that everybody uses. But that's where I earned and saved enough money to get my first bicycle, And I don't know, when I was 13, 14, I worked with my father doing haying and taking care of Miss Grace's place. And so I've been working ever since I was 10 years old.
And Ruth, you said you were in the post office for a while, but was that your first job?
Well, I seem to have a lot of jobs at home, but I never got paid for them. Whether it was ironing father's shirts, or we had an old Speed Queen washing machine. And when it was washing day, we'd pull the old machine out of the shed, hook it up to the faucet in the kitchen, and haul out the table with 2 huge aluminum pans for rinsing. So what you would do, you'd put the clothes in, it'd go back and forth, then you'd put the wringer on and you'd wring them into one tub, and then you'd slosh them up and down, and then you'd put the wringer on the other side and you'd go into the third tub. By that time they were supposed to be okay. So they would go through the wringer and put into the wash dish or the wash basin, and then to take them out to the yard and hang them up on the clothesline. And in the wintertime, you know, that wasn't any fun. But anyway, sometimes we'd have to go out and get the sheets, and they'd be frozen stiff, and they'd be hard. Do you remember that? They'd bring you in, and Mother would say, well, we'll put them up over the stove to air. They're fine, they will just air. And so we would air them on these big brackets we had over the stove. But doing the laundry was just one of the things that, you know, Mother's helper had to do, and I'm sure many of you probably had to do the dishes and all that kind of stuff, which my sister and I did. But my first real job was at the post office.
So now you understand why there was a laundry day. Lucy, did you have any jobs when you were on the island, or
Did I what?
have any jobs that you did on the island?
I think the main job was to try to stay out of trouble.
Right.
I think we worked on that.
Yeah.
Did you hear me?
Yeah.
Well, if you were a summer person, obviously it's not the same. But for George and Ruth particularly, what made you, or what was the final decision that made you decide to stay here instead of moving to someplace else?
Well, I'll tell you that from the time I was 5, I always intended to stay here. I never intended to go anywhere else. But of course, go to school, go out, go work, get married, have kids, get a job, work. And we always came back for every holiday. It's just my special place. I guess many of you could say that. And it's like having a big something in your pocket, you know, something you can always look back on. Your golden childhood, I think of as I look back upon it. Those were happy, happy days, and I feel so lucky to have had that experience. And I hope that that all happens for you too.
George, was there anything that tipped the scales in your favor, in Islesboro's favor?
Well, I probably got married and had a lot of kids, so I couldn't go anywhere else.
Anybody else on coming back to the island or staying on the island? All right. I want a huge round of applause for Lucy Burr, George Durkee, Ruth Hartley, and Bill Warren.
I want to applaud the audience for putting up with us.
There are refreshments at the back. If people would like to get together with Clan Warren, Clan Burr Aldrich, Clan Durkee, Clan Hartley Mitchell Pendleton for photos, that would be terrific. Thank you all very much for coming. There will be another of these in August, and we hope it's even approximately this much fun.
I want to say one more
So go ahead, Lucy, grab the mic.
I've lived in many places, New York City, Long Island, Boston, other places. But my roots are here in Dark Harbor.
Thank you all very much. That was fun. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Does anyone need help coming down the steps?
I'm here for life.
What?
I'm here for life.
You're here for life?
Yeah.